Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Abitchonistim. IDSF is the leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security policies to guide the state of Israel. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning in to this briefing. It's a great privilege to be able to share with you behind the headlines what is happening here in Israel. For everyone who celebrated Purim yesterday, a belated happy Purim. And for those of us who find ourselves in Jerusalem today, happy Purim today for all of you. It's a great pleasure to be joined by Brigadier General Amir Avivi, the founder and chairman of IDSF. General Avivi, it's good to see you again. We've missed you on these briefings this past week.
Thank you very much.
In Gaza, but are you able to tell us what has happened in terms of the operation in the Shifa hospital, why we're hearing about northern Gaza at this time?
Well, as as explained several times, when the IDF says we took over the northern part of Gaza and destroyed the battalions, they're basically saying that they, let's say, killed 700 terrorists out of 1,000 in each battalion, and the battalion dispersed, and they're not functioning as a unit. But still, there are many terrorists in the northern part, which we need to deal with and clean the area. Now, in the northern part of Gaza, there are whole areas with no citizens, and also the terrorists are not staying there because there is no electricity, no food. So the people who are in the north, 200,000 people, are all concentrated around Shifa Hospital, and the humanitarian aid is also coming through this area. So what happened is that terrorists from all over the north, they moved to this area, and they felt that, or thought that the IDF is not going to operate again in the hospital. So they thought this will be a place where they will be safe, and the IDF let them go in, more and more terrorists. And once the vast majority of terrorists went into the hospital, and the IDF operated very fast. And I think that the way it was done shows how much control there is in the northern part. I mean, to bring the forces of the IDF in no time to the area of the hospital and surround the hospital without even the terrorists having time to escape, this shows how much control we have, how fast we can reach any place in the north and operate there. So we sent the Shayetet on fast armored vehicles called Eitan. They were the first forces that ran very, very fast and surrounded the hospital. And once we made sure nobody can go out, then the other forces arrived and they started clearing the hospital, killing hundreds of terrorists and arresting hundreds of terrorists. So this is a very successful operation. But still, in the last month or two, we are continuously cleaning areas that we already control, like Khan Yunis or the northern part of Gaza or certain areas in the central camps. But we are not really continuing the attack on existing battalions, two of them in the central camps and the brigade in Rafah. And as a result, today there was a shooting to Ashdod. Last time there was a shooting to Ashdod was in January. 8 rockets were shot from Deir el-Balah. This is exactly where we didn't operate yet, in the central camps. And this shows that until we will go in, as long as we're not doing that, there will be repercussions. They will continue shooting and regrouping and organizing in places that we're not controlling. So we must renew the attack in Rafah and then in the central camps in order to destroy the remaining battalions of Hamas and also reach the leadership of Hamas and the hostages, who are most of them are in Rafah and some in the central camps in areas we haven't operated yet.
The current, thank you everyone who's sending in all these questions. There's so many questions coming in, it's hard to keep track of all of them. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. The current negotiations right now with Qatar and discussions of a hostage deal. Can you share your opinion on all of that and what all of our viewers should be advocating for in terms of the hostages?
I think that the Hamas is feeling that every day that passes, especially looking at the administration's behavior, is working for them. That maybe in a few weeks, the IDF won't be able to go into Rafah anymore. And this, I think, distances the prospect of a hostage deal. And this is why Hamas has very, very high demands, which we cannot meet. And they're stalling, buying time. I think that if the policy of the US would have been, okay, Israel, going, destroy them, do it fast, they would have reacted differently. They would have felt much more pressure militarily, and everybody agrees, the Chief of Staff, the Minister of Defense, the Prime Minister, that the key issue is military pressure. If there is no military pressure on the leadership of Hamas, then their motivation to release hostages is much lower. So it's very hard to say whether there'll be a deal or not. It's not clear. And it's something that it's also behind the scenes, so it's very difficult to give an assessment. But I think that the less are the chances of going to Rafah in their eyes, the less motivated they will be to release hostages.
So bottom line, what needs to happen for Israel to go into Rafah? It's been so long that nothing has happened. What are we waiting for at this point?
So I think that we need to present as fast as possible a plan to evacuate the people that the administration understands and accepts. And we need to get the army ready to operate. And following that, we need to go in and do the job. There is no other choice. And we see that every day that we don't do it, the pressure is mounting. The time is not working for us. It's working against us. So we really need to push this operation. And also we have to remember that when Israel says we need to finish first with Hamas, and only then we can focus on Hezbollah, every day that we don't go into Rafah is another day that the citizens of the north are not going home. And they have no prospect even of when they are going to go home. And also Israeli citizens who live in the towns really attached to the border. There are also, many of them haven't come back. And the government says we're going to let people stay in hotels until July. And then what? So I think that we must move forward. And we really need to make sure that our politicians unite and are focused on one thing, on winning. And anybody who is not doing so is not doing his job.
In terms of U.S. aid to Israel, is that a factor right now in terms of how the IDF is operating in Gaza or in the north? Is the lack of U.S. aid preventing more operations in Israel?
I think that it's definitely a factor, especially munitions. I'm not talking about big projects which will, be relevant maybe in a year or 2 or 3. I'm talking about the flow of munitions. At the moment, it's very, very crucial for the ability of the IDF to continue to sustain the operations and also be ready for a war in the north. So definitely for Israel, it's very important to keep the US on our side, focusing on enhancing our capability to sustain the fight. And I think that also regionally, other countries like Saudi Arabia, Gulf states, they are looking at the US to see how they are helping their biggest ally. And if they will feel that the US cannot even stand strongly behind its strongest ally, they will say, okay, well, what about us? How much we can trust the US? And therefore, I think it's very, very important, even from a US perspective, to be very strongly supporting Israel. It's okay to look at humanitarian aid. It's okay to talk about evacuating Palestinians, but it's not okay to tell us to do things that will cost us winning the war, might cost us the whole war.
Now, almost 6 months into this war, do you think Israeli society is still rallied around this idea of destroying Hamas, or people kind of had enough and no longer supportive of everything that you and the IDF are trying to do?
I think that the vast majority of Israeli society is willing to fight, is willing to sacrifice, as long as there is a goal at the end, an achievement. Everybody agrees that we should fight and we are willing to sacrifice as long as we are moving towards a decisive victory. There is one thing the Israeli society is not willing to accept: having a reality where we are not victorious in Gaza. And this is something that I think the Prime Minister understands well. It keeps talking every day about decisive win. And this is exactly what we need to do. We need to win decisively.
Now, last week on our briefings, we had a number of experts talk about the port that the U.S. is going to build in Gaza, and I didn't get a chance to ask you your opinion. Are you able to share what your thoughts are on providing civilian aid in Gaza, and whether this port is going to be constructive and helpful?
Well, I think that obviously, in order to sustain the war, you need to prevent a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and therefore you need to keep the flow of humanitarian aid. The problem is that most of it, the way it's done now, it goes to Hamas, and Hamas is taking most of the aid to itself, and also they distribute themselves food to the society, so they're controlling the society. And we have reached a point where we can completely change that and really transfer the responsibility, at least for a while, to the IDF in a way that completely prevents any food to Hamas, and also signals to the Palestinians that we are in charge. We are the ones that are giving food, and this can bring us a lot of intelligence. This can bring an understanding that Hamas is not controlling Gaza anymore. This is very important. It's not happening the way it should. Israel at the moment is trying to bring humanitarian aid with proxies and doing it in a way that is not very effective, not understanding that really it's the IDF that needs to take responsibility and control until we manage to organize local people, which might take time.
The UN Security Council is demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. What role does the UN have right now in this war, either in Gaza or in Lebanon? Is Israel under any obligation to play nice, so to speak, with the UN?
We have to differ between the UN and UN Security Council. It's two different things. The UN can say anything. It's not relevant. They have no way to enforce anything that they're saying. And they keep passing resolutions against Israel almost on a weekly, monthly basis. UN Council, Security Council is completely different. They can impose sanctions. So this is why in this place, US veto is crucial. And this is the one thing Israel really needs from the US, because if Israel would have handled itself the right way, we would have invested in the last 20 years in our industries and made sure that we produce all the munitions we need and weapons and so on. We can even get along without US aid. $4 billion is not a big amount of money for Israel. We can cover these expenses ourselves. One thing we cannot do, we don't have another solution for the UN Security Council. For this, we need the US. So it's very crucial that the US keeps vetoing decisions which are against Israel, because it's obvious that these decisions are really outrageous. I mean, telling Israel to do a ceasefire for what? I mean, we're willing to do a certain ceasefire for hostages. Other than that, why in the middle of our war we are supposed to do a ceasefire? It doesn't make sense. So it's definitely something we would expect the US administration to veto, as they did before. And if they don't, this is a very, very big change in the US-Israeli relations, which will have repercussions for generations. But we have to see where this is going.
So thank you again to all of our viewers, supporters, for sending in your questions, being engaged, and following this briefing. General, the last question I'll ask is really to give some direction to all of our viewers. Many of our viewers in the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, they're very engaged in local politics. They write to their local representatives, they write to their media, they post on social media. So what would you say of all the issues we just spoke about? What's the number one issue that people should start typing away on their keyboards and messaging and reaching out to the media in order to really promote as the number one issue right now for Israel?
So I think that first there needs to be an understanding. We have said that from day one. This is not a local war, it's a global war. It's a global war of the West, of people who cherish life and democracy and liberalism against radicalism, hate, Islam, pure evil. And these elements are all over the West. It's not just Israel. And when Israel will win decisively against Hamas, this will have an impact also on the rest of the world. This will send a message to the West: we can win against this radicalism. But if we let Hamas win, or overall the Iranian very extremist axis, this is going to impact the whole globe. And it's going to be very bad news for Europe, for the US, for Australia, England. So this is why I think it's very, very important that all the Western world really supports Israel. I don't think there has ever been a more righteous cause than the war Israel is fighting now against this pure evil of Hamas. And this is what we need to talk about. And to win the war, we need to go into Rafah. This is the way to win the war. Moving the people, it's not an issue. I don't know why everybody is doing an issue from that. We moved them more than 30 miles from the north to the south. Now we maybe have to move them 3 miles. It's a bit simpler than moving them 30 miles. So I don't think this is such a complicated issue. It's a technical issue that we can manage to overcome, and then we can go into Rafah.
Okay, I'll give one final question, even though that was the final question. Many of our viewers are pointing out that the U.S. in fact abstained from the UN Security Council vote. They want to know your thoughts on the U.S. abstaining, the implications.
Yeah, it's disgraceful. I think it's disgraceful and poses a serious question about the relations between the countries. I think that we have seen this same act also with Obama at the end of its administration. And for me, it sends one clear message, that Israel needs to be as independent as possible in all possible aspects. Talking about our industries, military industries, capabilities, and so on. And the administration is showing that they cannot be trusted. It's a big problem. And even so, we have to go into Rafah, with or without their consent. We cannot lose the war.
Brigadier General Amir Avivi, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing all of this. I know our viewers are very appreciative of your presence today and all that you are doing for Israel and the Jewish people and fighting this war. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning in. We will be back with you tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.